The solo continued. Ace Frehley stopped. He closed his eyes. And the room felt the weight of silence nobody understood yet. Detroit. 1977. The Cobo Hall. 11,000 people packed into concrete and steel, waiting for the guitar solo that would split the night open. Kiss was midway through their set, pyro, platforms, the full spectacle. Gene Simmons breathing fire. Paul Stanley working the crowd. Peter Criss hammering the drums. And Ace Frehley stage right, under blue and white lights, doing what he always did, playing. Not performing. Playing. There's a difference. Ace never worked a crowd the way Paul did. Never commanded a stage the way Gene did. He stood in his corner with his Les Paul and let the guitar do the talking. The spaceman. Silver platform boots. Makeup. The costume said spectacle, but the playing said something else entirely. Truth. The solo was building. Shock Me. His song. The one he'd written, the one he sang, the one that belonged to him in a catalog dominated by Stanley and Simmons. The crowd was with him, 11,000 people locked into every note, every bend, every sustain. And then, midway through the second chorus, something changed. Not in the song. Not on stage. Something in the air itself. Ace felt it first. A shift. A heaviness. Like the oxygen in the room had suddenly become denser, harder to breathe. He opened his eyes, scanned the crowd, and saw nothing different. Same faces. Same hands in the air. Same energy. But the feeling wouldn't leave. His fingers slowed on the fretboard. The solo that had been climbing toward its peak began to descend, notes spacing further apart, sustains stretching longer. The band noticed but didn't stop. This was Ace. He played what he felt. You didn't question it. You followed. And then he stopped entirely. Hands still on the guitar. Fingers on the strings. But no sound. The bass and drums continued for 2 more bars before Gene looked over, confused. Paul turned from the front of the stage. Peter's sticks hesitated on the hi-hat. Ace stood perfectly still. Eyes closed again. Head tilted slightly down. Guitar held in playing position but silent. The crowd noise began to shift from excitement to confusion. 11,000 people wondering if this was part of the show or if something had gone wrong. Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. He stood there, breathing, feeling, listening to something none of them could hear. 20 seconds of silence. On a rock stage in front of 11,000 people, 20 seconds is an eternity. Paul was about to say something into his mic, cover it with banter, turn it into a moment, when Ace opened his eyes. He looked directly at the lighting tech booth at the back of the arena. Made eye contact with someone nobody in the crowd could see. Nodded once. Then lowered his guitar and walked off stage. Not running. Not rushing. Just walking. Like he'd suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be. The band stood frozen. The crowd erupted, some cheering, thinking this was planned, others confused, some starting to boo. Paul grabbed his mic. Ladies and gentlemen, the spaceman has left the building. Big smile. Showman recovering. Don't worry, he'll be back. He does this sometimes. Needs to recalibrate his spacecraft. Laughter. Relief. Paul Stanley doing what Paul Stanley did best. Holding it together. But backstage, in the narrow corridor behind the amplifier wall, Ace Frehley was running. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 3 hours earlier. Ace had arrived at the venue around 4 p.m. Early, as always. Not because he was anxious or overprepared. Because he liked the quiet. Liked walking the empty stage before the chaos arrived. Liked plugging in his guitar while the roadies were still taping down cables and the sound tech was still adjusting levels. The arena had been empty except for crew. Ace had climbed onto the stage, plugged into his rig, and played for maybe 20 minutes. No songs. Just sounds. Runs and riffs and ideas he'd been carrying in his head. The way some people journal, Ace played. A young man had been watching from the lighting booth. Maybe 19, 20 years old. Skinny kid in an Aerosmith t-shirt and jeans. He'd been hired as an assistant lighting tech for the tour, his first real gig in the industry. His job was mostly carrying equipment and taking notes, but he'd been told to stay in the booth during soundcheck in case the head tech needed something. When Ace started playing, the kid had stopped working. Just stood there in the dim booth, listening. Not to the spectacle of Kiss. Not to pyro and platforms and theatrics. Just to a man and a guitar in an empty room, playing like nobody was listening. After about 15 minutes, Ace had looked up. Scanned the empty arena. His eyes had landed on the lighting booth. On the kid standing there, silhouetted against the work lights. Ace had raised his hand. A small wave. Acknowledgement. The kid had waved back. That was all. No words exchanged. No conversation. Just two people in a big empty space, one playing, one listening, both understanding something that didn't need explaining. Ace had unplugged, set his guitar down, and headed back to the dressing room. The kid had gone back to work, carrying that moment with him like a secret. Now, 3 hours later, midway through. Shock me. Ace had looked up at that same lighting booth and seen the kid again. Still there. Still watching. But this time, the kid wasn't standing. He was slumped in his chair. Head back. Not moving. From the stage, Ace couldn't see details. Couldn't see the kid's face clearly under the work lights. But he saw enough. Saw the wrongness of the posture. Saw the stillness that wasn't just stillness. Saw a body where a person used to be. That's when the air had changed. That's when the weight had pressed in. That's why Ace had stopped playing. Because across an arena full of 11,000 screaming people, Ace Frehley had somehow known that the one person who'd really been listening was gone. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. Ace hit the backstage corridor at a full run, guitar still strapped to his back, makeup starting to run with sweat. Security tried to stop him. I need to get to the lighting booth. Now. Sir, you can't. Now. Something in his voice. Security stepped aside. Ace took the stairs 3 at a time. The lighting booth was on the 3rd level, accessible only through a maintenance corridor. He'd never been up there before, but he knew the way. Every arena is built the same. Follow the cable runs. Follow the light. He burst through the booth door. The head lighting tech was on his knees beside the kid's chair, hands shaking, a walkie-talkie pressed to his ear. Need medical now, lighting booth 3, he's not breathing, I don't know what happened. The kid was exactly as Ace had seen from the stage. Slumped. Still. His Aerosmith shirt riding up slightly, exposing pale skin. His face slack, lips slightly blue. Ace dropped to his knees beside him. What happened? I don't know. The tech's voice was breaking. He was fine, he was watching the show. I turned to adjust a cue, and when I looked back he was like this. Ace put 2 fingers against the kid's neck. No pulse. His skin already cooling. An aneurysm, they'd find out later. A congenital weakness in a blood vessel that had been waiting 20 years to rupture. Could have happened anywhere, anytime. Happened in a lighting booth in Detroit while the kid watched a band he probably didn't even like that much, working a job he'd been lucky to get. Happened while Ace Frehley was playing guitar 60 feet below. The paramedics arrived 4 minutes later. Pronounced him dead at the scene. Nothing anyone could have done. Fast and painless, probably. One moment watching a show, next moment gone. His name was Michael Corrigan. Ace learned that later. Learned that Michael had been trying to break into the industry for 2 years. Learned that this Kiss tour was his big break, his chance to prove himself, his foot in the door. Learned that Michael had told his parents he'd watched Ace Frehley's soundcheck that afternoon, and it was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. But in that moment, kneeling in the lighting booth while paramedics worked and security kept the corridor clear and somewhere below 11,000 people wondered why the show had stopped, Ace didn't know any of that. He just knew that 3 hours ago, he'd waved at a kid who'd been listening. And now that kid was gone. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. The show didn't resume. Paul had tried to restart it, gone into Detroit Rock City, attempted to carry the energy, but something was wrong and everyone could feel it. After 2 songs, Gene had called it. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to technical difficulties, we need to end tonight's show early. Thank you for coming. Detroit, you've been amazing." Boos. Confusion. 11,000 people filing out of Cobo Hall wondering what the hell had just happened, if they'd get refunds, if this was part of some elaborate stunt. Backstage was chaos. Managers on phones. Road crew packing equipment. Band members in their dressing rooms, makeup coming off, trying to process the night. Ace sat alone in a corner of the stage, still in full costume, guitar across his lap. The arena was empty now except for crew. The house lights were up, killing the magic, turning the spectacle back into concrete and metal and electrical cables. The tour manager found him there. "Ace, we need to pack out. Trucks are waiting. Give me 10 minutes. We're already behind." 10 minutes. The tour manager looked at Ace's face and decided not to push it. Ace sat alone on that empty stage and played. Not Shock Me. Not any Kiss song. Just sounds. Quiet sounds. The kind of playing you do when no one's listening except yourself. Bends and sustains and notes that hung in the air like questions without answers. He played for the kid in the lighting booth who'd never hear another guitar solo. He played for the empty arena that had been full an hour ago. He played for the difference between performing and playing, between spectacle and truth, between the mask and the man underneath. After about 8 minutes he stopped. Set the guitar down gently. Looked up at the lighting booth one last time. "You were listening," he said quietly to the empty room. "Thank you for that." Then he stood up, walked backstage, and let the crew pack out. What followed silenced everyone in the room. The next night, Pittsburgh. Different arena, different crowd, same show. Except for one thing. Before Shock Me, Ace stepped to his microphone. He never talked on stage. That was Paul's job. Paul handled the banter, the crowd work, the connection. Ace just played. That was the agreement. That was how Kiss worked. But that night in Pittsburgh, Ace spoke. "This song is for someone who was listening. Who really listened. His name was Michael." That was all. No explanation. No story. Just that. Then he played Shock Me, the way he never played it before. Slower. Heavier. Every note deliberate. Every bend meaningful. Not showing off. Not performing. Just playing. Truly playing. The band adjusted around him without question. Gene's bass dropped into a lower groove. Paul's rhythm followed Ace's lead instead of pushing it. Peter's drums became a heartbeat instead of a machine. For 4.5 minutes, Kiss stopped being a spectacle and became a band. When the solo finished, Ace lowered his guitar and the arena erupted. Not the usual screaming. Something different. Something quieter but somehow louder. Recognition, maybe? Of a moment that meant something beyond entertainment. Ace never explained it to the press. Never told the story in interviews. Reporters asked why the Detroit show had ended early and he'd say, "Technical issues," and move on. Asked about the dedication in Pittsburgh and he'd say, "Just someone who was listening," and leave it there. He didn't defend himself. He never did. But for the rest of that tour, and for years after, before every performance of Shock Me, Ace would look up at the lighting booth. Wherever he was. Whatever city. He'd find the booth, make eye contact with whoever was working there, and nod. Every single time. The guitar techs noticed. The road crew noticed. Nobody asked why? That was Ace. You didn't question it. You just understood that some things didn't need explaining. 3 years later, Ace left Kiss. Decades passed. Reunion tours came and went. But the ritual never changed. Before. Shock me. Look up. Find the lighting booth. Nod. Michael Corrigan's parents never knew that the last thing their son saw was Ace Frehley playing guitar. They never knew about the wave during soundcheck. They never knew their son died doing what he loved, listening to music, in the presence of someone who understood what listening really meant. But Ace knew. And every night, in that brief moment before the solo, he remembered. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Real power isn't in the spectacle. It's in the moment when everything stops, and you play one note that matters more than 1,000 that don't. Ace Frehley never explained that. He just kept playing it.